I don't.
Recording.
Okay. No, now, yes.
Okay. I just restarted. So the city team in Carthage is a multi-stakeholder group consisting of members of the local council, of an environmental research organization called REACT, of members of the public, but also of and we formed a core city team, which are those three groups of people: council, research organization, selected members of the public, and a wider city team that also included local residents, that included representative of educational organizations, of ministries, given that Carthage is also, Tunisia is also relatively small, and Carthage is so close to the capital. So for a year before the University of Brighton became an active facilitator of a food master planning process, the city team was formed. Yeah, and that city team, which is what I said before we were cut off, what they did first is defining a number of societal challenges they want to address through food. Yeah, and at that moment it was unclear, how do we work with those, and what are our key issues in Carthage? And what we did is, this is our University of Brighton team, we suggested to use something we call the CPOL opportunity mapping method, long word, which is a participatory planning tool that Andre and myself have developed through practice over the years. So whenever we are asked by an organization or a city to work on urban food, we more or less apply this mapping method. Yeah, and what it consists of something we call an inventory of urban capacity, which is basically taking stock of what is there, which generates a food map. And those two items, they are part of what we call the understanding phase. We want to understand the different context, and we want to understand how it relates to space. And we then have an imagining phase where we create something that we call an opportunity map. And at that point, the process could stop. So the stakeholder group, whether it's being a city or a food initiative, could go away with that opportunity map and use it for whatever aims they would like to use it. But the most interesting and also most useful usages would be to continue the process and develop a food strategy, develop a food master plan, an advocacy note, or a position paper. Yeah, so it's still, we are still not there that the food transition is actually happening on the ground, but we are preparing the material, the concepts, the strategies to do so. So this process we also applied in Carthage. Yeah, so we went through registering space, resources, stakeholders. We tried to identify what the desired challenges are, which values we are applying, what the local needs are. We drew this food map. We looked based on this at various concepts and strategies. And we did this all through mapping, and we did most of it online. Yeah. So yeah, these are images from when we engaged in the city. Yeah. And well, let's say this differently. Most of the data collecting work was done by the city team themselves in Carthage. Yeah, and you see it here. So the city team would visit food growing activities in Carthage. They would engage with the very few urban farmers that exist there. They would go and look at supermarkets and retail structures. They would speak to very small, minute food system workers, like this lady who grows spices and makes spices and sells them basically, yeah, on the street. Yeah, and when we were at Carthage, we would join them, but most of this recording and inventory work was done by the Carthaginians also throughout COVID. Yeah. So, and based on this, we were able to produce a food map. And the food map for us was a tool also to categorize and think about what is actually there in Carthage. And we divided this into main categories. We looked at available spaces, yeah, and we looked at available food system activities, yeah. Now, this is something that many food activist groups have done in various contexts, yes? So we would usually, when we engage on an urban or neighborhood or regional scale, we would look at space, at least as sort of architects and planning professionals, yeah? And we would look at food system activities. In the Tunisian context, which is also important to understand, this hadn't been done before. So actually, this is probably the first project that in a participatory manner looked at a particular location and tried to record systematically what exists. Yeah. So you can see here again, these yellow and orange parts of Carthage are those which are archaeological sites. Yeah. In the orange parts, there is already agricultural activities. So there's more or less. So sometimes these pieces of land are used agriculturally, sometimes they are not. And the whole legal governance structure of agricultural use is very unstable. Yeah, and you can imagine that from the onset, this was one of the major sort of themes that the city team in Carthage would mirror to us. You know, we have all of the space. 65% of the land of Carthage is actually archaeological sites, and it cannot be used, or it can only be used for temporary agricultural activities, many of which are clandestine and not officially permitted. Yeah, you have a second very interesting given, which is the sea. Yeah, so there's a lot of seafront, and traditionally also fishing activities. Yeah, but at the moment very little of this. Yeah, and you can see how the city team approached its city. Yeah, I mean, basically facilitated by us, University of Brighton, and also the Boku University in Vienna, who were the work package leads of this EU project. We defined our own spatial classification, a spatial classification which is unique to Carthage, i.e. the importance of educational spaces was something that came out through discussions that in that particular context, educational spaces are important, first because they are landowners, or the land is owned by governments, and second because a lot of these spaces had surplus open spaces also on rooftops, etc., that potentially could be used for agricultural activities. So, and we looked at the entire food system. We looked at production spaces, which basically many of those are already represented here. We looked at processing, we looked at retail, at consumption, restaurants, etc. We looked at recycling, which hardly exists in Carthage, even though waste is a big problem. Yeah. So this is how we try to build a picture of that small city, basically, one that really takes food seriously and looks at it holistically. Yeah, and then through the work, as I said, a lot of work on the Miro board, we were able, and actually also what was interesting in terms of method, once we had formulated this food map, once we knew what is going on in Carthage, we run what we called an expert workshop, where on the one side we had the wider Carthaginian city team. I mean, it was online. On the other side, we had experts from within our EdiSitNet project, i.e. people that themselves have been working since a long time in urban agriculture and food systems. And you may know some of them. There's Martin Regelsberger, who is a waste and water expert. And there was Paul de Graaf from Rotterdam, who, you know, is very knowledgeable, about urban agriculture, but also about networking. There was Andre Filioun, and somebody from Andernach, Germany's first edible city, so to say. Yeah. And in this workshop, we identified a number of strategic statements, which unfortunately you can't read now because they are too small. Yeah. But from those, we were able to develop the first ideas of urban themes. Yeah. So which, for example, were to look at the orchard as something that one may work with in Carthage more profoundly, given that the city had already started to plant fruit trees. Yeah. Or we looked at the idea of a network that looks at food education, given that there are so many educational facilities, that there is a large societal challenge for healthy eating. Or we looked at this idea of there is a beginning. There are some very, very few urban farmers or small bakeries and food processing factories that may enable to look at a new generation of urban farmers. Also, very important is this idea that actually Carthage, everybody looks at Carthage as a place of history and a place of monument. But what could one do if one wanted to make Carthage again a place to look for in the future? Yeah. So all of this took us about a year and a half to discuss. It's a long process, but yeah, also alongside other processes. Yeah. And what we came up with, also to my surprise, not with a spatial opportunity map, but we came up with something that we call the opportunity map diagram, a new invention for our process, where we tried to get this complexity of the Carthage situation in one image. Yeah. So we had identified 3 major themes. This unused, frozen archaeological land, which we said could become our edible historic urban landscape. We had identified this significance of education and networking, and basically formulated a vision which is called food knowledge networks. And we had identified the importance and also negligence of the coastline. Yeah. Trying to think about this with a vision called sustainable coastline, which is also simply about stabilizing the coast so that with rising sea levels, it doesn't get eroded so much as it does now. Yeah, and you can see in this drawing all the elements that are important for this food system or for food master planning in Carthage. Here are 4 concepts that we want to work with. Carthage in the world, you know, as a UNESCO site. This new generation of farmers, the idea of self-sufficiency, and the idea of using with agriculture economically. And these are all ideas that were brought together through these different mapping exercises throughout the 1.5 years of work. Yeah, we have then looked at the sustainability goals and which could be met with which vision and concepts. And we have jointly identified an exemplary number or type of projects that one could start engaging with. Yeah, for example, linking again to this Punic port, this important harbor in Carthage, or creating an urban agriculture learning center, yeah, or developing the food strategy for Carthage, yeah. And we also try to plot all the stakeholders that exist in Carthage on the same map, so everybody is on one page, yeah, as well as the available spaces that we had identified in our spatial classification. So it looks very theoretical and very much about words, but it's also a map, and it was incredibly helpful for the Carthaginians to be able to get hold of what their food mapping, food vision could be, yeah. And the project got so far that the local council commissioned one of their own planning officers, the Carthaginian planning officers, to develop a first version of a master plan for Carthage. And I found it interesting how these planners worked with the opportunity and food map materials. So again, they used the existing and potential urban agricultural projects. And then they basically identified different subject areas that the city may be working with according to their own individual regulations in metabolism, education, commerce, tourism, culture, and industry. Yeah, and our last little very important output of this project is that we have produced an about 30-page long advocacy document in English, French, and Arabic. You have seen it in the first slide. Now this is the English version. And this advocacy document is there for the local cities team to use and go campaigning. Because at the moment, as I said earlier, in Carthage, the food transition hasn't happened yet. We are just there in order to prepare it, yeah. But I believe this is one of the important missions that we also as food systems planners, yeah, or sustainable urban food planners have, yeah. And this is my last slide. I only have one more, which is because I want to tell you that we are just now publishing a new book, which is called Urban Food Mapping, on the subject of how different actors across the world are using this idea of mapping, which is so fundamental to the planning disciplines in order to move forward with food issues and food systems issues. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katrin. It's always a pleasure to listen to you and to see how you never stop moving and applying also knowledge into the reality. So thank you. And there are a couple of small questions here. One from